Kids, would you step outside for a second?
What up everyone, I am GallantHavoc, and it's time. It is finally time to review the long-awaited sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom. Now for those of you who don't know, I am a huge Zelda fan. It is my favorite game and franchise of all time. So naturally, and admittedly, due to some personal bias, I loved this game. But that's not going to stop me from talking about it. So without further ado, this goddamn masterpiece. Man, oh man, 4 years of waiting have finally paid off. 6 if you include the 2 years after Breath of the Wild came out, before the game was announced. Fair warning, this review won't contain any major story spoilers, but I will be showing small bits from later in the game. So let's begin. Tears of the Kingdom is, by all accounts, a sequel to Breath of the Wild. If you play Breath of the Wild, you'll feel at home going into Tears of the Kingdom. However, that's not to say that the transition is entirely smooth sailing. Let's start with the map. Is it the same Hyrule as Breath of the Wild? Sure, but it was given a huge facelift with plenty of new additions. The biggest and most notable two being the Sky Islands, as advertised, which funny enough are actually the minority in terms of sheer scale. Because then there's what's under Hyrule, in the depths. A pitch black cave system that spans the entire map. Surface, sky, and the depths, each with their own set of locations and an absolute load of things to do, and plenty of new experiences to boot. And I am so happy to say we got actual themed dungeons back. Sure, they are structured and progressed similarly to the Divine Beasts in Breath of the Wild, but they very much have their own respective identity. And with entirely new abilities, a tweaked UI, a heavily modified map, new enemies, and more, Tears of the Kingdom is definitely much more than just an expansion to its predecessor. Get fucked, doubters. Which brings us to the new abilities replacing the Sheikah Slate runes, and all of them are equally useful. First, there's Fuse, which is probably the one you will use most often, which allows you to fuse materials or other weapons to your equipment to increase its attack power and in some cases, the durability, which addresses probably the biggest complaint in Breath of the Wild. Fuse can also be used to attach things to your shield to help you traverse the world, ranging from rocket jumping to goddamn skateboards, adding more versatility to the shield surfing seen in Breath of the Wild. Welcome to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater Hyrule Edition. You also got Ascend, which allows you to pass through any object that is directly above you, which can be very useful for vertical traversal, and even scouting out areas where enemies are above you. Plus, the animation looks really cool, and don't ask me why, but it really reminds me of something out of an anime-inspired music video. You also have Recall, which allows you to rewind objects' motion, which you can use to rewind fallen chunks of the Sky Islands to get up to sky level, or send large projectiles back at enemies. Now probably the most useful and unique of all of them is Ultra Hand. Similar to the Magnesis rune from Breath of the Wild, Ultra Hand lets you pick up and move around objects with the power of your mind. Well, power of your new right arm, that is. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Ultra Hand allows you to merge objects together to build things, from bridges to platforms to vehicles to goddamn war machines. The devs really said, hey, you want to see Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts, but better? But no, in all seriousness, the vehicles are a real game changer. You can build just about anything with the materials given to you throughout the world, whether they be the Zonai devices to build elaborate mechanisms, or even improvise by using wooden boards and rocks. You can build anything from bridges to hot air balloons to Land Rovers to flying machines to catapults to a goddamn speeder bike like you'd see in Star Wars. Hell, you can even build a pod racer if you really wanted. Now the best part is, there are seldom times where you necessarily have to spend time building things. But the option is there if you want to let your imagination run wild. However, there is a lot of trial and error to be had that can become very tedious. Not saying it's a bad thing, but they can be annoying at times. Now being a sequel, naturally, the combat would need to feel both familiar and new, right? And it does. It very much does. Just like before, you have the standard weapon styles, one-handed, two-handed, and staffs, as well as your handy-dandy bows and arrows. And thanks to the fuse ability, they are given so much more versatility and function. Want to fuse a shield to a greatsword so you can still block while having both hands occupied? You can do that. Want to fuse a mushroom or plank of wood to the end of your sword to bounce or blow enemies away? You can do that. Want to fuse a Zonai cannon to your spear and create a rapid-fire explosive firearm? Yep, you can do that too. Speaking of combat, the enemies. My god, the enemy variety in this game compared to Breath of the Wild is a welcome change. Enemies, whether the base overworld grunts or the bosses, new and old, show up. Veterans like the likes. There's a tongue twister. Likes and Gibdos, who are now more in line with insects than the undead, are the two most notable base enemies that make a return from past Zelda games. Don't worry, we'll get to the bosses who have returned. Newcomers like the autonomous constructs, who replace the Guardians from Breath of the Wild, the bigger, badder Boss Bokoblin, the freaking spider monkey like Horriblins, and all the enemies from Breath of the Wild, save for the Guardians, return with a new look. Now possibly the biggest, no pun intended, addition to the game that really sets it apart from Breath of the Wild are the aforementioned bosses. For the overworld bosses, you got all the returning bosses, including Lionel's, because they're a boss in their own right. But we also got other big bads like the upgraded Stone Talus, the Battle Talus, the Adult Froxes, who I swear were inspired by Dodongos, giving you throw bombs in their mouths to stun them. Flux Constructs, who look like they belong in Minecraft, and a returning big bad boss from the Zelda games of old, Ghidorah! I mean Gleeox. And they are no joke. It took me till almost the end of the game before I was finally able to stand up to one and kill it. They don't screw around. The same could be said for many of the enemies in game, new and old. Older enemies were given new attacks and tactics. For example, many of them use their new horns to ram you or swing at you, and some even wear a full set of armor. Even the goddamn Lionels, who just like in the last game are a menace. Especially when you reach a point called the Floating Coliseum, and fight not one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 of them in a gauntlet. Each of them progressively tougher than the last. That's gonna give me Vietnam flashbacks for a while. Going back to when I mentioned the dungeons, they each have their own unique boss as well. Gone are the days of fighting the elementally very Blight Ganons. One such new boss being Colgera, a cold, icy twist on Mulgara from the Wind Waker, who is a spectacle to behold. The music ripped right from the Dragon Roost Island theme is the icing on the cake. And the Gloom Spawn, or Gloom Hands for those unaware, actually are another overworld boss. But once you kill all the hands, a very familiar name pops up in the top of the screen. Phantom Ganon. This had me reeling, as Phantom Ganon was one of my favorite bosses in Ocarina of Time and in Wind Waker. So seeing him back was a treat, even if he is drastically different than previous incarnations. And speaking of Phantom Ganon, we can't talk about him without talking about one of the main attractions of Tears of the Kingdom. Or hell, he may as well be the main attraction. Oh yeah, if you know me, you know where I'm going with this. Ladies and gentlemen, the man, the myth, the legend, Ganondorf. I don't know how many of you know this, but Ganondorf is my favorite villain of all time. I've always had kind of an affinity with the dark side, and this dude epitomizes evil. But he also has somewhat of a relatable quality to him, especially in Wind Waker. His designs throughout the years, my favorite being Twilight Princess, have always been great. His boss fights are almost always epic. Hell, even if one of them is a glorified tennis match in an Ocarina of Time. Even his theme song is unforgettable, as you may have noticed given I literally use it as my intro and credits. Thank you, Little V Mills, by the way. And this time around, for Tears of the Kingdom, you can bet your ass I was beyond excited to see him return. Just look at my reactions. And let me tell you, in this game, Ganondorf fucking delivers. His mummy form, which you fight as Phantom Ganon, was cool enough. Tell me I'm not the only one who thought of the mummy from 1999 when I saw it. But then as the game goes along, you learn how he looked in his prime, with the pseudo-samurai design, which I think is fucking amazing, and my love for Japanese culture just added onto it. Even his mannerisms seemed very samurai. But it doesn't stop there. Then he goes full out Dragon Ball Z and transform into his Demon King form. My jaw dropping is an understatement. The take I did up of him way back when the first announcement trailer came out aged pretty well if you ask me. Without spoiling anything, until now, Twilight Princess was my favorite final fight with him. And honestly, this game dethrones it. Especially considering how much of an upgrade this was to the fights with both Calamity Ganon and Dark Beast Ganon in Breath of the Wild, combined. In my Breath of the Wild review way back, I stated how much I wanted a one-on-one sword fight with Ganondorf. Lo and behold, we got it, and it's breathtaking from start to finish. And once again, just like Kolgura, the music. The music just adds so much to this fight, especially if you're as much of a Zelda fan as I am. Particularly with Ocarina of Time. Okay, I think I got that nerd moment out of my system. So with all that being said, what did I think of The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom? Obviously, I loved it. It took everything Breath of the Wild did and made it better. It added a whole bunch of new things to do and experiment with, which to a certain point, I will admit, got kind of overwhelming, but not to the game's detriment. Easily the biggest upgrade was the story, becoming more conventional and coherent than Breath of the Wild, but still retaining some of its freedom and its non-linearity. Not to mention how emotional it was, especially during a certain part that I will not divulge. And obviously, bringing back Ganondorf in probably his coolest appearance to date. Mwah! And that is why I am giving The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, a whopping gallant rating of 10 out of 10.
I will crush any opposition. I will rule. That is what a king must do.
Oh my God!
he's so goddamn cool!
Folks, let me tell you, I think my lineup for favorite Zelda games has changed. Ocarina is still at the top, always will be. Twilight Princess is still at number 2, but I do actually think Tears of the Kingdom has dethroned Majora's Mask at number 3. It did enough to change up and upgrade the formula that Breath of the Wild introduced. They turned it into a bigger, better beast that ultimately led to me making that decision. And like Zelda said at the end of Breath of the Wild, I'm surprised to admit it, but I can accept that. Anyway folks, that about wraps it up for this very long review, and in case you haven't heard, this will not be my last video or review, but I will be shifting away from reviews to focus on other content, like Inspired By. So in the meantime folks, I am GallantHavoc. Wreak some havoc, and I'll see you in the next one.